Welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm on my way home from work, the day after Drive It Day, probably one of my favourite days in the automotive calendar in the year. So let's start off today's episode with a kind of quick refresher about what Drive It Day is and what it's all about. So Drive It Day was started in 2005 by the Federation of Historic Vehicles and was designed to kind of commemorate the 1,000 mile trip that was done in 1900 in the early forms of automobiles, to show kind of how reliable and viable they were as an option for transport at the time. And I guess now it's almost doing the same, but with historic vehicles rather than contemporary vehicles. It's showing in kind of a mass movement that these historic vehicles are still a viable option. They still have their uses and they're still quite a lot of fun to see out about on the roads. So Drive It Day really encourages people to get out in their vehicles, quite often for one of the first big reliability checks of their vehicles if they've been away for the winter. Now obviously myself and Peggy are in a little bit of a different situation, and if you're watching on YouTube, a lovely Mini's going past, but yeah, we're in a different situation in that she's my daily driver, so every day is kind of Drive It Day. Every day I'm testing that reliability, that viability of using an older car as a classic car. Yet Drive It Day still feels really special and exciting to me, and is always something that I like to mark. I remember Drive It Day being a keen part of growing up. I remember a lot of my teenage years it being often the first time since New Year's Day that we'd been out in one of Dad's cars, and sometimes it would be to an event, but more often than not back then it would be using one of those cars for whatever we were just doing on that Saturday, be that visiting family or be that doing a shop or whatever. But since getting Peggy, I've really enjoyed making a bit of a fuss of Drive It Day and doing something. And this year I was actually quite late in deciding what I wanted to do. I hadn't really found anything, and Peterborough branch Morris Minors hadn't really decided what they were doing either. And then the meet at Lancaster came up. I'd heard about it potentially happening and told Lewis and my family about it, and then all the details were released and we had to make some plans. So Lewis actually organised for any of the Peterborough branch who didn't already have plans to meet up in Deeping, which is where we usually meet for our monthly kind of noggin and natter sort of situation, and then drive down to St Ives. Now obviously going up to Deeping is somewhat in the opposite direction to me, but the route that they planned basically it came past our driveway. So we said, okay, we will wait in a kind of safe place at the side of the road, and then as you guys come past, join on the end of the convoy. So Lewis's girlfriend Chelsea sent me a message when they were at the kind of village before ours, so that we knew that we were ready, watched them as they kind of came past us, and then we tagged on the end, and we had a really pleasant convoy over to St Ives. We know the route pretty well, as it tends to be our way to there and to Huntingdon anyway, but it's lovely backcountry roads. Admittedly, some of them are quite typically fen-like in being quite dippy, but the cars managed it quite well. it was really nice to be in convoy, and I managed to get some pretty nice footage of the 4 Morris miners that had come down, plus Peggy, and then Jamie was in Wyvern, the Spitfire behind us. We arrived at Lancaster not long after it started. Lancaster insurance companies have their insurance offices in St Ives, and have started kind of making use of the car park to host meets. You might remember that meet that we went to way back in, I think it was in February now, and so this is kind of starting a bit of a trend, I think, for hosting little coffee mornings at their offices. And we were not the first group there, but we were certainly quite early. A lot of people arrived after us, and included in that were my parents, who had come along in Dad driving the 1931 Singer Junior, and Mum driving Lulu, the Singer Chamois from 1967. And my sister had spent the day essentially hopping between cars, depending on who she wanted to passenger with. So she'd arrived, I think, with my mum in the Chamois that morning. But yeah, we were there right way through till pretty much end time at 1 o'clock. And it was a great morning. There was some really fantastic cars that had made the trip over, and along with that, some really fantastic owners that were great to have a chat with. It was good that some people I knew were coming along, even though it was much further afield to them than it was for us, and it made for a really nice catch up as well. Some of my favourite cars there was a really lovely Triumph TR6 and a kit car from the 70s that had kind of a very pre-war feel to it, and then a leather body across the rear, which again really fits in with some of that pre-war motoring, and just a fantastic car to kind of have a look round and nosy. It's interesting because whilst this weekend there's this meet on, next weekend is the Quest Brothers meet at the Pike and Eel, and whilst there was some small crossover between the sorts of vehicles that were there, there was also quite a lot of vehicles that I hadn't seen in the local area that had come along as well. So it made for, despite them being so close together, still an interesting meet to see so many different cars and so many different vehicle owners as well. The weather held out as well, which was great because there had been threats of quite a lot of rain for Drive It Day, which would have been a shame, but it held out, and so people were able to stay around a lot longer at Lancaster, enjoy the atmosphere, enjoy having quite a lot of fun. My dad enjoyed the fact that there was some young kids going around showing quite a lot of interest in the cars, and when they do that, my dad's always really encouraging of them getting in the cars and honking the horns and kind of having a bit of fun, taking some photos, making some memories with some classic vehicles to help foster that interest perhaps further down the line. As things started to wrap up at Lancaster, our Drive It Day was far from finished. My parents and myself and Jamie and my sister decided we were going to go to our regular haunt in the area of Eric's Fish and Chips, and my sister's boyfriend decided he was ready to join us, so Jamie zoomed off in the Spitfire to go and pick him up, and we headed to Eric's to grab a table and put our orders in ready for when the boys arrived. We had a lovely lunch and then grabbed some petrol from the nearby Morrison's petrol station before heading off on a bit of a scenic tour up through Bluntisham and Erith and Somersham, and then down towards my parents' house, where we had a cup of tea and a bit of a chat before heading home. It was a really lovely drive through the countryside. We managed to stop off at a classic car sales garage in Somersham, which is always a nice little photo opportunity. And I had my sister's boyfriend as passenger, Alex, so he did some filming as well as we were at the front of the convoy. At some point, myself and then Jamie was behind us, couldn't spot my mum, who was in the chamois directly behind that, and my dad, who was at the back in the junior. Couldn't spot them and we didn't know what had happened. My sister had started off in Lulu the chamois, and apparently the two of them had decided that they were going to pull over and my sister was going to swap cars. So she was really jumping about in all the vehicles and getting the most out of Drive It Day. So that was our Drive It Day. It really is one of my favourite days, not just because I always make sure that we're kind of doing something with the vehicles on that day, but also because so many other people make that effort as well. And you find that so many cars are out and about. Whilst we were pulled over waiting for our convoy to come past first thing in the morning, we saw other cars going past us that were on their way out. Some of them we spotted again later at Lancaster, but others were just out for their day to drive. We saw others when we were driving around in the afternoon, and we saw some even when we were sat there kind of waiting to pull out of the petrol station. And there's nothing more fun than when you're out in your classic car, potentially in a convoy as we were. And there's nothing more fun than when you're out in your classic car, potentially in a convoy as we were, to spot other cars out and about enjoying their sunshiny day, as I have literally today. I think the other thing about Drive It Day is it really does seem to mark the start of getting your cars out and about in the finer weather for the rest of the year, and it marks that time when you start to see so many more classics out and about on the road. When they decided 123 years ago to do their 1,000 mile reliability run back in 1900, choosing to do it in April was a fantastic choice in terms of it then being a date that the Federation have chosen to continue to commemorate for a good cause. It is worth noting that Drive It Day is designed to also raise money for the NSPCC and Childline through the selling of the rally plaques as well. So you can find those on their website and help raise some funds for a good cause. But yeah, that was our Drive It Day. Fantastic time, and I'm really looking forward to everything else that we've got planned for the driving season. We actually did a little bit of planning and thinking when we went back to my parents' house for some cups of tea and stuff afterwards. So lots of things coming up. I'd love to hear what you guys did if you were there at Lancaster, what you thought of the meet and whether you'll be there again next month. Unfortunately, I've got something else planned, but it's good to know that that's an option on the weekends when I haven't got stuff planned over the summer. And well, what else you got up to? Which car were you out in? Did you have a choice of vehicles that you were trying to get done? Did you have a frantic fix-it day on the Saturday to get a car roadworthy for Drive It Day on the Sunday? I'd love to hear more about that, either down in the YouTube comments or over on social media if you're listening over on Spotify. I've still got the rest of my drive home once I get out of this traffic, but in the meantime, you guys drive safely and happy motoring.